If your portfolio drops right before you need the money, was the problem bad luck, bad timing, or poor portfolio design? That question matters because diversification is often treated like a magic formula. But diversification is not a guarantee, and it is not one perfect portfolio mix that works for everyone. It is a decision-making framework. A well-diversified portfolio is built around several questions. What is the money for? When will it be needed? How much uncertainty can you realistically tolerate? How much liquidity do you need? And what personal, legal, tax, or practical constraints should shape the design? Diversification can reduce the impact of any one investment, sector, country, or asset class performing poorly. But it cannot eliminate risk, and it cannot guarantee that a portfolio will avoid losses. So instead of asking, what is the best portfolio? A better question is, what framework can help me build a portfolio that fits its purpose? Let's start with the basic concept. A portfolio is simply the collection of assets you hold together. Diversification means spreading exposure across different investments so your outcome does not depend too heavily on one single asset, company, sector, country, or market condition. The idea is simple. If different parts of the portfolio do not all move in the same direction at the same time, weakness in one area may be partly offset by strength or stability in another. But this is important. Diversification does not always work perfectly. In some market environments, many assets can fall at the same time. Diversification is not about removing risk. It is about managing concentration risk. Concentration risk is the risk of being too dependent on one thing. That can be obvious, like owning only one stock. But it can also be hidden. You might own several funds and still be concentrated if they all hold similar companies, track similar indexes, focus on the same country, or depend on the same economic conditions. So the number of holdings alone does not tell you whether a portfolio is truly diversified. What matters is what those holdings actually represent. A useful framework begins with purpose. Step 1 is defining the objective. What is the portfolio supposed to do? Common objectives include long-term growth, capital preservation, income generation, or funding a specific future need. A growth portfolio is usually designed to increase in value over time, often by accepting more short-term volatility. A capital preservation portfolio is usually designed to reduce the chance of large losses, often with lower expected growth. An income-focused portfolio emphasizes cash flow, though income can vary and is not guaranteed. The objective matters because different goals require different trade-offs. A portfolio built for money you may need soon is solving a different problem than a portfolio built for retirement decades away. If the purpose is unclear, the allocation decision becomes guesswork. Step 2 is defining the time horizon. Time horizon means how long the money can remain invested before it is expected to be used. In general, a longer time horizon may allow a portfolio to tolerate more short-term volatility because there may be more time to recover from downturns. But future market behavior is uncertain, and recovery is never guaranteed. A shorter time horizon usually increases the importance of stability and liquidity. But time horizon is not always one date on a calendar. Many portfolios have layered time horizons. Part of the money may be needed soon. Another part may be intended for much later. In that case, it can be helpful to think in buckets or functions, rather than forcing every dollar to serve the same role. Step 3 is understanding liquidity needs. Liquidity means how easily an asset can be converted into cash without major delay or price disruption. If you may need access to money unexpectedly, your portfolio design has to account for that. A portfolio may look efficient on paper, but fail in practice if it forces you to sell investments during an unfavorable market just to meet spending needs. Liquidity needs can come from emergency reserves, planned expenses, business obligations, tax payments, or simply the desire for flexibility. The right level of liquidity depends on your personal situation, account type, and in some cases, your jurisdiction. Step 4 is identifying constraints. Constraints are the real-world limits that shape the portfolio. These can include taxes, legal restrictions, account rules, ethical preferences, investment access, complexity, volatility sensitivity, or a strong preference to avoid certain types of assets. Constraints are sometimes treated as secondary, but they are central to portfolio design. A portfolio you cannot understand, maintain, or stick with is not well designed, even if it looks good in theory. That brings us to step 5, defining risk in a practical way. Risk is often described as volatility, meaning how much portfolio values move up and down. That is one useful measure, but it is not the only one. For many investors, the more important question is not, how bumpy is the ride? The better question is, what type of failure am I trying to avoid? Failure could mean not having enough money when needed. It could mean taking losses that cause panic selling. It could mean running out of liquid funds. Or it could mean building a portfolio that is too fragile for your actual life circumstances. This is where risk capacity and risk tolerance matter. Risk capacity is your financial ability to withstand losses or fluctuations. Risk tolerance is your emotional ability to live through them. Someone may have a long time horizon, stable income, and strong savings, which may suggest higher risk capacity. But if that person is likely to panic during a major decline, their risk tolerance may be lower. A durable portfolio usually respects both. Step 6 is choosing the asset allocation. Asset allocation means deciding how the portfolio is divided among broad categories of investments, often called asset classes. Common asset classes include equities, fixed income, and cash or cash equivalents. Equities or stocks represent ownership interests in companies. They are often used for long-term growth potential, but they can be volatile and can experience significant losses. Fixed income, often called bonds, generally represents loans to governments or companies. Bonds may provide income, stability, or diversification benefits, but they also have risks, including interest rate risk, credit risk, and inflation risk. Cash and cash equivalents prioritize liquidity and stability. They can reduce volatility and provide flexibility, but holding too much cash may limit long-term growth and may lose purchasing power if inflation is higher than the return earned. These are general principles, not guarantees. Actual outcomes depend on market conditions, timing, costs, taxes, and the specific investments used. Within each asset class, diversification can go deeper. For equities, diversification may include company size, sector, geography, or investment style. For fixed income, diversification may include different maturities, issuers, credit qualities, or types of bonds. Maturity refers to when a bond is scheduled to repay principal. Credit quality refers broadly to the borrower's perceived ability to repay. These choices can change how the portfolio behaves, but they can also add complexity. That introduces an important trade-off: simplicity versus precision. A simpler portfolio may be easier to understand, monitor, and maintain. It may reduce overlap and make decision-making more consistent. A more precise portfolio may offer finer control over exposures, but it can also become harder to manage and easier to abandon during stressful periods. There is no universal best point on that spectrum. The right level of complexity depends on the investor and the purpose of the money. Let's use a simple hypothetical example. Imagine two investors with the same amount of money, but different goals. Investor A expects to use a meaningful portion of the portfolio in the near to medium term for a planned life expense. Investor B does not expect to need the money for many years and already has stable cash reserves outside the portfolio. Even before choosing specific investments, their portfolio structures may look different. Investor A may place more emphasis on liquidity and lower volatility. Investor B may place more emphasis on long-term growth potential and may accept wider fluctuations. Neither approach is automatically better. The difference comes from the objective, time horizon, and liquidity needs. Here is another example. Two people. One means they can see a portfolio decline and still stay disciplined. The other means they want strong returns but have never experienced a major market downturn. Their answers sound similar, but their real risk tolerance may be very different. That is why risk assessment is not just a questionnaire. It is also about behavior, experience, constraints, and self-awareness. Step 7 is implementation. This is where broad asset categories become actual holdings. The educational point is not to choose a specific fund, security, or product. Suitability depends on circumstances, access, costs, taxes, account structure, and jurisdiction. The key principle is consistency. Each holding should match the role it is supposed to play. If part of the portfolio is meant to provide liquidity or stability, the investment used for that role should reflect that purpose. If part of the portfolio is meant to provide broad growth exposure, the investment should match that function. Confusion often begins when investments are selected first and their roles are explained afterward. Step 8 is checking for hidden concentration. This is one of the most overlooked parts of diversification. You may think you are diversified because you own many line items, but those line items may still be tied to the same underlying risks. For example, multiple funds may own many of the same large companies. Several investments may all depend on the same interest rate environment. Or a portfolio may appear global, but still be dominated by one country or one sector. Diversification is about underlying exposure, not just labels. Step 9 is creating a rebalancing process. Rebalancing means bringing the portfolio back toward its intended allocation after market movements change the weights. For example, if one asset class grows much faster than the others, it may become a larger share of the portfolio than originally intended. That can change the risk profile. Rebalancing helps maintain the structure you chose, instead of letting recent performance quietly turn the portfolio into something else. But rebalancing has trade-offs. It can add discipline, but it may feel uncomfortable because it can involve trimming what has recently done well, or adding to what has recently lagged. It may also create transaction costs, taxes, account restrictions, or timing issues, depending on how and where it is done. So there is no universal rebalancing rule that fits every person, account, or jurisdiction. The important point is to have a process rather than relying on emotion in the moment. This connects to another trade-off: flexibility versus discipline. A process that is too rigid may ignore real changes in your life, but a process that is too flexible may become an excuse for constant tinkering. A useful framework allows updates when your goals, constraints, or financial situation genuinely change. But it avoids reactionary changes based only on fear, excitement, or recent performance. It also helps to compare diversification with common alternatives. One alternative is concentration, placing a large share of the portfolio in a small number of ideas. Concentration can produce outcomes that are very different from the broader market, for better or worse. But it increases dependence on being right about fewer things. Another alternative is overcomplication, adding too many themes, slices, or specialized exposures in the name of diversification, even when they do not clearly improve the portfolio. A third problem is accidental under-diversification, owning broad-looking products that are actually dominated by a narrow set of exposures. A good framework helps avoid all three by tying each decision back to the portfolio's purpose. Now let's talk about the limitations. Diversification is useful, but it is not a shield against all risk. A diversified portfolio can still lose value. In stressed markets, assets that seem different may behave more similarly than expected. Relationships among asset classes can change over time. Past patterns may not hold in the future. Inflation can erode purchasing power. Liquidity can become most valuable at exactly the time it is hardest or most expensive to obtain. Taxes, fees, and account rules can affect outcomes. And investor behavior can matter as much as allocation. Panic selling, constant switching, or abandoning the strategy at the wrong time can damage even a well-designed portfolio. There is also a subtle trade-off. Diversification can reduce the impact of one bad outcome, but it can also reduce the impact of one extraordinary winner. That is the deal. You give up some concentration in exchange for broader exposure and less dependence on a single outcome. So what is the practical takeaway? Build a diversified portfolio by making decisions in the right order. First, define the objective. Second, identify the time horizon. Third, clarify liquidity needs. Fourth, list the constraints. Fifth, Think about risk as both financial capacity and behavioral tolerance. Sixth, choose an asset allocation that reflects those realities and trade-offs. Seventh, implement the allocation in a way that matches each holding to its role. Eighth, check for hidden concentration. Ninth, create a rebalancing process that is disciplined but not mindless. If you remember one thing, let it be this. Diversification is not about finding a universally perfect portfolio. It is about building a portfolio whose structure makes sense for the purpose of the money, the uncertainty of markets, and the realities of your life. No framework can remove uncertainty, but a clear framework can help you make decisions more deliberately, more consistently, and with a better understanding of what your portfolio is designed to do.